Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Covenant Calendar, everyone. We got some interesting points ahead for you to view. Let's start. Let's have a look. Is it true? That's a big question. Is it true the covenant New Year Day is always on the fourth cycle of the week? Now, what would that fourth cycle of the week be pointing to? Well, the Zadok calendar declares that the new year every year starts on the middle of the week on the pagan name Wednesday. Is that true? Is New Year's Day in the scripture, is it always on the fourth cycle of the week? Or is there other places? Well, we're going to have a look at that. Just a short, brief look at it. We're going to be charting this out. And there are many studies to back this information up. Also, we have another question here. Is it true? Is it true the covenant Passover day is always on the third cycle on a Tuesday? Or is it possible that the Passover might be found on other days of the week throughout Scripture? How about when we're told that Passover is always on the third cycle of the week? What calendar is that going to show is not true, is not in alignment with the Torah? That's what we're looking at today. So let's move forward. This is titled The Independence of the Seven Cycle Week. Why independence? Well, if you look on the left, you'll see a picture of what is described as Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel. And when we say that the seven cycle week operates fully independently within the two Tukufa based Shane format, the best way we can describe that is by that picture of Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel. The week, the seven cycle week, being the inside wheel, it functions perfectly independently in conjunction with the year wheel, which is the outside wheel. It's independent, but it operates in conjunction with it. By determining exactly what cycle of the week the Passover occurred in several scripture testimonies, this easily provides us with exactly what cycle of the week the New Year Day and Passover occurred in each testimony. So I ask, if these were on different days than what you've been told, would that be of interest to you? Would that perk up your curiosity? It sure did mine. We're looking at the independent function of the seven cycle week, or the 7-day week. Its function is totally separate. It's independent from the year, and that year is regulated by the Teshuvah. The year is called the Shane. So this week operates fully independently, and we're going to be looking at New Year's Day and Passover, the days that are recorded in Scripture. And the results, New Year Day witnesses in the studies found to date in Covenant Calendar has clearly documented a New Year Day cycle on every cycle of the week. The New Year Day and Passover is not locked to one particular cycle of the week every year. And this interesting documentation, it's a bonus, and it's from Covenant Calendar. This is the first chart coming up. This is what you're going to see going throughout the study. And Charlene is just welcome to jump in at any time. Passover, first year of the flood with Noah. I'm going to bring up my cursor here. I hope you can see it on the upper left-hand corner. First cycle right here, Sunday in the pagan terms, so we can recognize it easily for those unfamiliar with the word cycle. On the first cycle of the week, on the 360-day year, this is Teshuvah or the equinox. It's on the first cycle of the week, starting the new year. The next day, of course, is New Year's Day. So there's your first New Year's Day on the second cycle of the week, your first example. It's in the first year, the flood with Noah. Now, just an interesting little observation here. Noah, by statute, did not qualify to observe this Passover. He was not allowed to. Not that he didn't want to. He was not allowed to by statute. He could not observe this Passover. Why not? I want everyone here to write down a little piece of paper. Try and tell us, why Why was Noah not able to observe this first Passover? Just a thought. Let's move on to the second year of the flood with Noah. So if we come into the middle of this chart, you'll see the fourth cycle, which is Wednesday. This is the 360th day of the year, and this is the day of Teshuvah. We understand is equinox. This is the last day of the year. New Year's Day, the very next dawn, is on the fifth cycle of the week, which would be a Thursday. And well, let's read this verse here, Genesis 8, verse 13. And it came to be in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, that the waters were dried up from the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked and saw the surface of the ground was dry. So a question here. Have you ever wondered what Yahusha was doing on earth that equates directly with the 27th day of the second month when Noah departed from the ark? Did you notice the emphasis on the word departed? Did Noah prophetically pinpoint our Mashiach? Charlene, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I have a question here for slide 4 and slide number 5. You might be wondering, how in the world did we determine the New Year day in the first year of the flood of Noah? How did we figure that out? Well, you have to come up to this here slide, this scripture, and this Passover, and you have to do an Omer 40 count. You have to do an Omer 40 count, and then you have to count backwards. That's how you can know what's happening. And you have to connect it up with our Mashiach in the Gospels. So it's a little bit of a calendar puzzle.
But it's a fun puzzle, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Charlene. Let's have a little bit of a hint here. Noah departed, emphasized in red. A little hint. Let's move forward. Abram's Passover in Genesis 15. It's a timeline of 430 years, which reaches to the Exodus 12 Passover. So in this Passover of Genesis Genesis chapter 15, we're going to see New Year's Day on the left-hand side here, New Year's Day on the first cycle of the week. And you count out 14 days to Passover. Interesting. Passover is on a seventh-day Shabbat. Here's another example for a Passover on a seventh-day Shabbat. This timeline with Abram is a research based from Exodus 12. Then, working backward 430 years on an Excel spreadsheet using 360-day years. The Passover on a seventh-day Shabbat is easily documented. What does this mean? When you look at the Exodus account, when you look like when they exited Mitzrayim with Passover there, when you take a 360-day year and you put it on a spreadsheet and you work backwards 430 years exactly, 30-day months, 360-day year, you will find that Abraham's Passover was on a seventh-day Shabbat. Precisely. It works out absolutely precisely with the strict 30-day months and a 360-day year. What does that mean? What does that mean to us? We're going to find out a little bit farther about this accuracy when we go from the Exodus the other direction. So just keep this in your mind. When we go back 430 years, it works out precisely. Let's move forward to the Passover of Mitzrayim. This is the first year in the wilderness. So coming up here into about the middle of your screen, you're going to see the third cycle of the week. This is the 360th cycle of the year. It's the last day of the year. It's the day of the Teshuvah. And this 360-day years, if you look at the Malapin tablets, it firmly verifies this info of a 360-day year, alongside of the 30 other civilizations that have 360-year documented. So this is not a stab in the dark. This is documented historic information. But with this third cycle of the week as the final day of the year, New Year's Day then comes on the fourth cycle of the week in the Mitzrayim scenario. So you count out from New Year's Day, 14 days, you come down to the 14th of Abib, which is Passover. Passover is on the third cycle of the week in this year. Well, that fits with what we've heard. We've been told that the Passover is always on a third cycle of the week. Well, this year agrees with that. Will the other years agree with it? Just thinking. We're going to be seeing this. We're going to move on. In the Choshek darkness of Passover, the firstborn were eliminated. Yasharel was liberated from bondage on this night. Liberated from bondage is a little bit different than when they physically left the place, physically exited. Let's read this verse, Exodus 13, verse 3. And Moshe said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Mitzrayim, out of the house of slavery. For by strength of hand Yahuwah brought you out of this place, and whatever is leavened shall not be eaten. This was their physical departure, and the 14th was their spiritual release from bondage, and, well, physical release too. But they did not physically walk out of the place until the next day on the first day of unleavened bread. But we're taking for this is New Year's Day is on the fourth cycle of the week here, and the last day of the year was on the third cycle of the week. Let's move on. This is in the desert. This is the first cycle and the first month of their time in the desert, and Moshe was commanded to raise the tabernacle. Yahuwah commanded him to raise the tabernacle on the first cycle of the first month. When is that? Moshe's second year in the wilderness here, documented the 360th day of the year. What day of the week was this? Just think about this. What day of the week was the Teshuvah on, and why was Moshe commanded to raise the tabernacle specifically on the day after? Remember, this is a preparation cycle. It's a Friday. And he was commanded on the day after, which was the first cycle of the first month, being a seventh-day Sabbath, he was commanded to raise the tabernacle. Why is this so significant? Because Moshe had to know, he had to see that shadow laid down in the ground from east to west so that he could have a perfect alignment platform or foundation for the raising of the tabernacle, so that when that tabernacle was erected, it was in absolute perfect alignment with the Matzeroth. That's the reason why Moshe was commanded by Yahuwah to raise the tabernacle on the first cycle of the first month. It was done on a seventh-day Shabbat, which was New Year's. The first time I saw this, I shook in my shoes. No exaggeration, because I was always taught you do no work on the Shabbat. Yet here, Moshe and everybody around him had work. They had to raise the tabernacle. And then I learned that when Yahuwah says to do something, you say, how high? You don't say, no, I can't do that. You ask, how hard do you want me to work? How long do you want me to work? What would you like me to do? It's Yahuwah's work. He requested it. We do it without question. So once again, the day before was a preparation day for Teshuvah. And the Teshuvah laid the shadow down so that Moshe could observe that shadow And then he knew the exact location to put the entrance door for the wilderness tabernacle precisely. From here, we count out 14 days. It brings us down to Abib 14, which is Passover, of course, on a preparation cycle. What does that do for the Zadok calendar, where they declare that Passover is always, without exception, on the third cycle of the week? Here's a direct controversy, I guess, with Zadok, is because in Scripture, here's another example of Passover being on the sixth cycle of the week. Just something that has to be addressed if you're looking at the Zadok calendar. Sequentially tracing the Exodus calendar documentation, the raising of the tabernacle was indeed on the seventh day Shabbat. Let's read the verse down here, Exodus 40, verse 2. On the first day of the first month, you are to raise up the Mishkan of the tent of appointment. It wasn't optional. That was a command. Now we go to Joshua's Passover. And do you remember me mentioning here about the time when we go back to Abraham with Genesis 15, the 430 years? And you can ask, well, is that accurate? Well, here's an example that shows you the accuracy is incredible. Because Joshua's Passover in Canaan, when you study it out, the Abib 14 Passover date come out on a seventh day Shabbat. You can find that very, very easily by looking at the very many details in Joshua. Then you go back to the Exodus, the Mitzrayim, or the Passover in Mitzrayim, and you go back 42 years, or you can count forward, whichever way you want. And when you count a 360-day year, a strict 30-day month, and you chart it all out, it comes out to exactly 42 years, exactly a Passover on the seventh day Shabbat from the Passover in Mitzrayim. Exactly as Scripture declares. It's written out. The accuracy is absolutely astounding. You do not get this with a lunar calendar. You do not get it with a Dead Sea Scroll-based calendar. It cannot happen. This can only happen when you take the calendar of the covenant. Why? Because Yahuwah is the one that formulated it. He does it with perfection. So this accuracy going forward, let me back up. This accuracy going forward from Passover Mitzrayim to Joshua's Passover in Canaan, that gives you credibility when you go back to Abraham. It's the exact same system. Charlene, do you have something to add to that?
Well, I like what you said, Tim, but I would also like to say that this Joshua study in chapter 5 and how it pinpoints the Shabbat as the Passover, and then we found out many, many, many years later on an Excel spreadsheet how it actually works out to be that way. This is a kingpin study. This is a pivotal study for all of Covenant Calendar, going backwards to Noah and all the way forwards to Yahusha and up to Paul and his friends that took the trip to Pentecost, to be at Pentecost on time in Jerusalem, way many, many years after the crucifixion.
So, Charlene, you say that this is such an incredible foundational study. Would that have anything to do with Joshua being the type that Yahusha needed to fulfill? Like, as in Joshua set the pattern, and then Yahusha would need to fulfill that exact same seed pattern? Is that why it's so important?
I believe that it is, and also Noah sets a very strong pattern as well that Yahusha fulfills. So there's several patterns in these covenant calendar studies, and Yahusha has to walk in them. He has to fulfill those patterns. Absolutely.
He wrote the script. He's got to walk it out. Thank you, Charlene. So now I want to say, Up at the left side here, New Year's Day was on the first cycle of the week. What does this do for the Dead Sea Scroll calendars that claim a third cycle of the week is always New Year's Day? Or sorry, the fourth cycle of the week is always New Year's Day. What does it do for those calendars? This gives you a scriptural example that there's something wrong with the calendars that are found outside of the book or outside of Torah. There's problems there. Everything that we read and compare and believe must be taken back to Torah. It must be proven by the statutes. If you cannot prove it by the statutes, it's not worth reading. But that has to be determined after study. So on this chart here, scripture documentation ensures beyond doubt that Passover was on a seventh-day Shabbat in this year. Note, it's not a violation for Passover to be combined with the weekly Shabbat. Not from Torah, not in Yahuwah's kingdom. Whoever tells you that, wherever that information comes from, has a big problem with Torah. We're now looking at covenant calendar and the Passover cycle in the year of Common Era 11. Very, very interesting year. In this year, Common Era 11, Yahusha was age 11 up until the 12th Gregorian month, or December. That is when his counting for his age changes. His age counts from the time of conception. That's very, very scriptural. It's when you study it in scripture, it's clear his time, his yearly age starts at conception. Very, very important to understand this factor. So here we are, Common Era 11. I want you to notice here where my cursor is. It's the 365th day of the year. That's the last day of the year. It's the second cycle of the week. And this is the day of the Teshuvah, or the day of the equinox, when the shadow is laid on the ground east to west. The very next day is the third cycle of the week. This is New Year's Day in Common Era 11. So we count out 14 days and we come down to Passover. And that is Abib 14 Passover. And the Passover in that year of Common Era 11 was on the second cycle of the week. And I want to stress, at the end of the year Common Era 11, Yahusha completed his 12th year. He was 12 years of age going into Common Era 12. And here's a video link. You'll need to copy this down and enter it. Very important study on Yahusha. It must be understood when you're trying to understand his life on this earth. Yahusha's witness at age 12, Luke 2. This is one incredible story. Only if you understand the background behind it. It's absolutely phenomenal. It's Common Era 12 right here. Let's come down to find the last day of the year, 365. The day of the Teshuvah was on the third cycle of the year, or third cycle of the week in that year. New Year's Day was on the fourth cycle of the week in that year. So we come down and we count out 14 days to Passover. Passover was on third cycle of the week. And Abib 15 was on the fourth cycle of the week. This is the very day that Yahusha was found. Note my words. He was found. No, well, the scriptures say he was found, but I do not believe Yahusha was lost. He was not lost. He knew exactly what he was doing. In fact, if you look at the verses, you will understand. Well, let's just read it. Let's read the bottom one. Yahusha opted of his own will to observe the high convocation of unleavened bread in the tabernacle 3 cycles after the Jewish Passover. So here, on this date, Abib 15, when Yahusha was 12 years old, in Common Era 12, He chose to stay behind. 3 days earlier, 1, 2, 3, that would put the end of the Jewish feast on the Shabbat. 3 days after the Jewish feast, he was in the tabernacle. What was he doing? He was asking questions to the scribes. What's the best way to teach? Ask questions. Get people thinking. Yahusha was in there. His parents discovered him. He was not lost. They discovered him in the tabernacle 3 days after the feast of the Yahudim. And when his parents found him there, his mother, being quite upset, said, "Son, what are you doing to us? How come you're here?" I'm just paraphrasing. She was upset. She knew how special he was, not to the extent that she could have, but she knew very, very well he was a very special son. "What have you done to us?" What was his option, or what was his reply? I can imagine his voice was very soft. Why do you look for me? Why do you ask? How come you're asking why I'm here? You're my mother. You're my father. You should understand why I'm here. How come you do not know? He was asking them why they didn't understand that he was in the tabernacle. He said, "I must be about my father's business." Well, what is his father's business? If you go to Exodus 23, verses 12 to 17, you will see there that every male, without exception, is required to present himself where? In the tabernacle before Yahuwah on specific feast days. Where was Yahusha? He was in the tabernacle, and he was presenting himself before Yahuwah at age 12, and his parents did not know it. Why not? Because they only knew about the lunar feast of the Yahudim that had just passed. They did not know about covenant calendar, the calendar of the covenant that Yahusha was observing. He was now witnessing in John 7, verse 6, when it says, "Because I witness against it that its works are wicked." This is one of the written witnesses that we can understand. He was witnessing directly against the lunar-based calendar of the Yahudim at age 12. If you want to see all this laid out in charts, there's studies available to show this. If you want to see this PowerPoint here, Yahusha's birth at age 12, entering into Common Era 12, for info and support, his 13th year had only begun, but had not yet been completed to be accounted for. Until the full 365 days had been completed, he could not have been called in his called 13 years. It was still his 12th year. Very, very important factor when you try to understand when the crucifixion was. Vital, something like oxygen. So this is very, very important to understand this concept. I'm going to read this bottom one again, Common Era 12. Yahusha opted of his own will to observe the high Shabbat, properly the high convocation of unleavened bread, in the tabernacle 3 cycles after the Jewish Passover. He said to his mother, "I must be about my father's business." He was required by statute to be in the tabernacle. That's why he was there. Let's move on to Yahusha's Passover cycle at age 13. When you count out that year, you can count it out accurately from that time he was in the tabernacle, and you come to Common Era 13, you will see that the cycle of Teshuvah, the last day of the 365 cycle year, it was on a 5th cycle of the week. Very severe problems for the Zadok calendar. Very severe. Continuing on, after this day of the Teshuvah shadow, New Year's Day, was on a sixth cycle of the week, on a preparation day, or a Friday in pagan terms. And you count out from there to Abib 14, Passover. Passover was on a fifth cycle of the year. I ask you again, what does this witness do for the Dead Sea Scroll calendars that claim that Passover is always on the third cycle of the week? What does that do? I hope it makes you question which one is right and where's the authority. At the end of the year, at the end of the year Common Era 13, Yahusha completed his 14th year. And we say, see the PowerPoint, Yahusha's birth, age 12 in Common Era 12, for historical info support. Very, very important studies to look at if you want to understand the timing of Yahusha's life on this earth, and most specifically of the crucifixion. Now we come to what I would call one of the most important chapters in all of the Messianic Testament concerning calendar. This one, it's right up there at the top. Very, very informative. John 7, Yahusha in Common Era 29. Charlene, I will expect you to have a comment on this when I'm done about what happens with the lunar calendar in this year. But right now, we're going to look at the last day of the year. It was 365 day of the year. This is the day of the Teshuvah shadow, and the next day would be New Year's Day, of course, and that was on the fourth cycle of the week. Excuse me. Count out the days to Abib 14, and Abib 14 Passover was on the third cycle of the week. That works out well. And if you want to see more information on this, look at Yahusha's Crucifixion Part 1 for a historic documentation chart. Passover, in 29 of the Common Era, was on the third cycle. Later, in the seventh month, in John 7, Yahusha purposely witnessed against the lunar-based Sukkot feast of the Yahudim, the Jews, by being absent until the midst of the week. He did not give any credibility to their lunar-based feast. The Yahudim were seeking him because they knew the statutes. They knew that if you believed in Yahuwah, and even if you didn't, you were, as a male, you were to present yourself in the tabernacle before Yahuwah. And they were demanding, where is he? If he calls himself the Messiah, where is he? They knew the statutes. They did not understand that Yahusha was not required to be at their lunar feast because it was not actually a credible lunar feast. In fact, it was an abomination. If you look at Isaiah 1, it will call it exactly that. It was a lunar-based abomination feast of the Yahudim. He protested strongly by not going up at the very start. But when did he go up? He went in the midst of the week. And if you take the lunar calendar of the Yahudim in that year and you chart it out, you will see, when you place the covenant calendar along beside it, you will see that Yahusha went up to the midst of their feast, and the purpose was a seventh-day Sabbath. He went up to teach in the tabernacle. That's what it says in Scripture. He was there, he protested, and yet he was still able to teach in the tabernacle. Now, the interesting thing about this is he was at their feast, their lunar-based feast. And when they were questioning him, he said to them, did not Moshe give you the Torah? Yet not one of you does the Torah. Were they observing Sukkot? Yes, they were observing Sukkot. The problem is, it was on a different calendar. It was on the lunar base calendar. It was not on the covenant calendar. They were not on the proper timing with Yahuwah. They were out of sync. That's why Yahuwah inspired Isaiah 1. I hate your appointed times and your new moons and your feasts. They are an abomination to me, is what he said. So Yahusha was witnessing strongly against this calendar. Charlene, there was something unique that happened with the lunar calendar in this month. Can you please tell us?
Well, I don't know if I'll be able to tell all of it, but I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that in John 7, this is the feast of the Jews' tabernacles or Sukkot that would be happening in the 7th month. But this here chart is actually showing the first month in year 29. When you count backwards, how you can find where the New Year day was and the Passover day. Now, this doesn't come about very easily. There had to be a lot of research. We researched from years 26 all the way up to 34 to be able to determine a midst of the week Passover when Yahusha is crucified. And of course, that is the feast following this Sukkot feast here in John 7. So there's a lot of work to do, lots of homework to do to be able to even get to this point where we can say that in this year it was a New Year day on the 4th cycle. And then, of course, 3rd cycle Passover. But it's very, very interesting that in this particular study that you have to calculate using the correct lunar calendar of the corrupt priesthood because they had different calendars. The calendar that they were using when Yahusha was with his 12-year Passover over there in Luke 2 was a different calendar. They switched calendars. So if you use, we used both calendars for both of these instances, and that's how we discovered that they had different lunar calendars. So there is some really interesting things that happen in this particular study of John 7 that you would have to see the whole series for. Really interesting. Very interesting, miraculous, what do you say? Glitch. I call it a glitch that I believe that Yahuwah put there. Okay? So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Thank you, Charlene. And this actually documents or backs up what Morgenstern documented about them changing their times of their calendar. It's kind of more support from historic documentation. Thank you, Charlene. I appreciate that. Let's move on to the great year, the ultimate sacrifice, the crucifixion, Common Era 30. We have numerous studies on this year of the crucifixion. Very, very detailed. We go through both lunar calendars, the Dead Sea Scroll calendars, the Equilux calendar, in great detail, and you will find that there is only 1 year between 26 and 34. Only 1 year that you can find a 12-hour offset between the covenant calendar when Yahusha died and the lunar-based calendar of the Yahudim. The connections between these two calendars, as written in the Messianic Testament and partially in prophetic time, the connections is absolutely astounding how it all comes together, completely fulfilled, point by point by point. And you can go through this crucifixion week in Common Era 30, 12 hours at a time, and read verse by verse, 12 hours at a time as you go through it. The foundation, the accuracy with scripture in this year and with the documentation is absolutely phenomenal. If you do not understand the dawn start of the day, there will be no hope of understanding this clearly. None. The dawn day foundation, as described by Yahuwah in the first 5 verses of Scripture, is paramount to this. It is just, if you do not have this dawn start of the day, you will not understand this calendar. But let's go here. This is Common Era 30. I want to say that the Teshuvah equinox is on the 4th cycle of the week, the 365th day of the year. The New Year's Day with the 5th cycle of the week. That flies directly in the face of the Dead Sea Scroll calendars. Enough said there. And we'll count out Abib 14. Here we come down 14 days. What day of the week is it? It's midst of the week. Didn't Daniel have something to say about that? Dying in the midst of the week? Sacrifices were going to be cut off midst of the week? Well, here it is, everyone. You can get another midst of the week if you jump through a couple hoops, but you will not get the 12-hour offset with the lunar calendar. You cannot get it. It will not happen on any other year other than Common Era 30. So this point right here with the crucifixion and the Passover on the midst of the week is absolutely phenomenal when you understand. You see these two arrows that point to this? This represents all the connections throughout Scripture that bring you together to this understanding. This is the central to understanding here. It's absolutely phenomenal. Victoria, I do see your hand. I'm going to get you to hold your question to the end. We will come to this. Scripture documentation, Daniel 9, verse 27, along with the gospel study, ensures that Passover was on the midst of the week, a fourth cycle in this year. Absolute accuracy beyond anything that you can comprehend up until you study this and you get all the details. It's mind-boggling how accurate and how this goes through Scripture, step by step, 12 hours at a time, word by word. It's mind-boggling to me. I highly recommend it. Charlene, I would like you to talk about this chart, if you will, please.
Well, this is another kingpin that is very, very special because all the way from the Noah studies with calendar, actually it starts in Genesis 1 with creation week with the dawn day, but Noah for calendar all the way up through the Genesis 15, the Exodus 12, Joshua, all the way through to the Passion Week of Yahusha. They're in 30 AD, 30 of the Common Era. Paul's ship excursion with 9 witnesses. This is happening in 57 of the Common Era. The details are absolutely incredible for calendar in these 5 chapters. When you work it out very, very carefully, you will find that the New Year Day was on a 4th cycle in this particular year. They're already have finished their Passover up at Philippi, and they're getting ready to do this excursion to get to Jerusalem in time for Pentecost on an Omer 50 count. So what we did is we looked at this study to see if it was actually 50 days to an Omer count, because some were saying it was a 99-day Omer count. So that was the purpose of this study. But you cannot do the Omer count unless you know where the New Year Day is, and unless you know where Passover is, and unless you know where the wave sheaf is. So we've counted it all out, and it turns out that this particular year in 57, now once again, have to go back, check all the years from about 52 CE all the way up to 63 to see which one of these calendar years is going to fit the calendar descriptions in this 5 chapters of calendar studies. Well, yes, a Passover day on Wednesday, and that gives, a New Year Day on Wednesday, and that gives you a Passover on the 3rd cycle, just like it was in Exodus 12 and a couple of other places. And sure enough, what did we find out? That with all the details that you'll find in Acts 20 to 24, we could identify exactly 57 CE. There was 4 main points in this study that had to all line up. We're looking now at some of those special 4 points. You'll have to go look at it and comparing it to what's happening on the lunar calendar. What we found out was that the Jews, the corrupt Jews, were still using the same lunar calendar as they were back at the crucifixion of Yahusha. And only the 3rd cycle Passover qualifies for the accuracy of the Omer count in this particular year, as well as is going to expose the counterfeit calendar that the Jews were using. Now, the interesting thing is that Covenant calendar has their New Year day on a midst of the week, but the lunar calendar has their New Year day on a different day of the week. However, both calendars have wave sheaf on the exact same cycle, the first cycle of the week. And that's where we found out that there was some very interesting things happening. It turned out at the end that we discovered that this witness was not just given for a 50-day Omer count. It wasn't 99, it was only 50 days. But this is a battle of the calendars. Apparently, Jerusalem is still using that lunar calendar, but Paul and his friends are counting covenant calendar. It's very interesting study, so you'll want to see that. But all of this here today in this study that we're doing is showing that New Year Day can be on different cycles of the week and Passover can be on different cycles of the week. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Charlene. You mentioned 4 main points. I'm just wondering how come you excluded the other 450? What I'm saying here, everyone, I'm saying that this study is right at the top of detailed studies that Covenant Calendar has produced. The details in this study is just absolutely phenomenal, and I highly recommend that you look at it carefully. It's a great, great study. The witness of this study after Yahusha had gone up to heaven, after he left the earth, this witness is so important, and most people have no idea of what's in here. So once again, if you want to look at this, contact us. We will get the study to you. Thank you, Charlene, for your talking about this. I appreciate it. This is a review of the independence of the 7-cycle week that functions impartially within the Tekufa-based Shane format from Genesis 1. Yes, the 7 cycles of the week operate fully independently from the year. They operate with inside of the year, but they are not not connected. So question here, is this assessment correct for the New Year Day witnesses on these cycles of the week? Well, we have shown that there's a New Year Day on the 1st, the 2nd, the 3rd, 4 times on the 4th, 2 times on the 5th. We didn't have one for the 6th, and we have one on the 7th day Shabbat. Are they correct? It will be up to you if you want to study this out to see if this is right or if it's wrong. Do not accept what we tell you. Prove it. Because when you prove it, you own it. When you prove it to yourself, then you can speak about it. But if you say, oh, well, they said at Covenant Calendar, that means nothing. Study it out for yourself, find out the facts, and then you can talk about it. And now we're going to look at the summary of independence for testimonies of the covenant year commencement thus far. We come down to Abraham here on the left-hand side, Genesis 15. New Year's Day was on the first cycle. Joshua, in the first year in Canaan, his New Year's was on the first cycle. And Noah, in the first year of the flood, New Year's Day was on a second cycle of the week. And we move over here to Yahusha, when he was age 11, New Year's Day was on a third cycle of the week. Go back to Moshe. And Moshe, in the first year in Mitzrayim, New Year's Day was on the fourth cycle of the week. And with Yahusha, his New Year's Day at age 12 was on the fourth cycle of the week. And with Yahusha, when he was age 29, New Year's Day that year was also on the fourth cycle of the week. And for Paul, in 57 of the Common Era, New Year's Day was on the fourth cycle of the week. So we have 4 examples of New Year's Day on the fourth cycle of the week. Then we move over to the fifth cycle of the week. With Noah, in the second year of the flood, New Year's Day was on the fifth cycle of the week. And with Yahusha, when he was age 30, New Year's Day was on the 5th cycle of the week in that year. Moving over to Yahusha at age 13. New Year's Day in that year was on the 6th cycle of the week. And then we go back with Moshe with his second year in the wilderness. New Year's Day was on a 7th day Shabbat in that year. So here we have seen New Year's Day on every day of the week. And this is all taken from the scripture. It's very, very interesting. And the question we need to ask, can any other festival calendar confirm such documentation? This is something that needs to be asked and needs to be displayed if at all possible. So it's true. Yes, it's true. The covenant New Year Day can be on any cycle of the week. That's what's shown in Scripture. And the covenant Passover Day, it also can be on any cycle of the week. We have found these throughout Scripture. It's very, very clear. And we would like to praise Yahuwah for these 12 exciting witnesses that clearly document through the Torah statutes his covenant calendar. This is the end. And of course, we have our email down there, questions@studythecalendar.com. If you would like to contact us with questions or comments, please do it. Thank you.